All right, welcome back. For the last portion of this talk, we're going to spend a bit of time speaking about or discovering strategies for writing clearly, writing in a compelling way, making the best use of the writing you're gonna get done with the strategies we just discussed. Uh, the last few years, I spent a lot of time thinking about ways in which people who aren't used to being storytellers can start using a lot of the strategies that are inherent in storytelling. You might say to yourself, strategies? How can that be the case? Strategies for storytelling, are people just naturally good at that? Well, I guess some are, but in this context, it turns out that we can use storytelling in a variety of different contexts, even ones we didn't otherwise expect would benefit from it. I think a lot of the papers that many of us work on, reaction papers for class, term papers for class, if we're in research or thesis or a dissertation, they look like this. It's just a series of facts, fact, 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 bark, 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 bark. That's most work that we see, most work that we read, most talks that we sit through. And all of us have sat through a talk, maybe even given a talk, where you just feel like people are just giving you facts over and over again, and it gets old after a little while. And when people write this way, when people deliver information this way, it's usually pretty easy to forget it, because after a little while of hearing facts, you just start tuning out. It's really hard to pay attention to something that lacks patterns, that's just nothing but repetition. And so the strategies we're going to talk about now focus on trying to disrupt that repetition and infuse structure in communicating. Now, when people hear the word storytelling, their first reaction might be, "Are you trying to con us? Are you just trying to use strategies that are going to pull a fast one on somebody?" No. All storytelling really is organizing the same facts you're trying to deliver, but in a fashion that facilitates people trying to get an understanding of what you're coming from, what you're trying to do, the information you're trying to convey. That's all we're doing here, is reorganizing the same facts you're going to give people before. And we're going to start by going through a clip, a very short clip that we're going to go back to over and over and over again while we're working together here. Right. So I'm going to give you about 90 seconds, and this clip is a link that I put in the chat window. So feel free to go ahead and listen to that. It's only about a minute long, but I'm going to give you about 90 seconds, and then we'll talk about it on the other side. Now, if I were to ask you a question, how big is a story? Your answer might be 300 pages, 2 hours. Big, big, big idea. The great thing about story, the reason why it's so effective, is that it's a cell in your, it's like a cell in your body. It can be very, very tiny, and also very, very big. And so as we're going through our discussion here, I'm going to go back to that script, the script that was in that minute, and show you how small story can get and how big story can get as well. And we're going to go back and forth and stuff, kind of like a cooking show. You know, in the cooking show, like they show all the different ingredients, but then like before the cooking even starts, they show you the completed thing. Right? So we're going to do something like that over the course of our time here. So what I would argue is that if you want to convey information that's memorable, that's easy to digest, and easy to get a reaction back and forth with somebody, you're going to be telling stories, because everything, it's storytelling and effective communication pervades all of life. If you're a scientist, a therapist, a teacher, a student, a filmmaker, you're using story to communicate what you want to communicate. One of the big things a story reveals is that although we might write for ourselves under some circumstances, under most circumstances, when we're writing something down, it's designed to communicate something to somebody else. And the circumstantial evidence over how important storytelling is seen when you get a sense of what people do in their free time. What do you do in your free time? Do you read? Do you watch a streaming service? You know, do you watch Netflix or Hulu or Prime? Do you listen to podcasts? What connects all those media together is that the best of them are telling very compelling stories, and there's nothing keeping you from using those same strategies. And you should do them because of what I mentioned before. When you give people successive facts, you're going to get very little back from them. It gets old very quickly because our brains have evolved to see patterns. Sometimes those patterns get us in trouble. Like when you look up at night and you look up there and you're like, that's a UFO. It's just a bunch of lights. It's not a UFO. You know, sometimes the patterns aren't that good, but the reason why we have them, and the reason why we can use them for good or for bad, is because our brains are used to turning on when we start seeing things shift. Right? Storytelling is kind of like a way of capitalizing the fact that the brains of people in your audience, whether they're people you're speaking to, like at a talk like this, or people who are reading something you wrote, you know, it's designed to sort of meet them where their brains are at. Their brains are all about patterns. And, you know, you don't want to get a pattern that's too complex. You don't want to get a pattern that you don't want to be devoid of pattern. You want to be somewhere in that sweet spot of I see something here that I'm used to, and it's going to be a way to facilitate me ingesting the information you're trying to convey to me. Olson's got a great definition. It's got all three of the main components of story right in there. It's a series of events that happen along the way in the search for a solution to a problem. Your favorite book, your favorite movie, your favorite podcast, your favorite television series, your favorite anything that you enjoy has these things in there. All these things are embedded in there. And you can break them down into discernible pieces. They're measurable. This isn't, you know, storytelling is not a gift people get. It's a set of tools you can train to use really well. There was an old trailer person, the announcer for the movies, like, and how did the movie start with this guy? In a world where, and then he basically spend about a minute describing the world. That in a world piece grabs you, right? Because the beginning of a story is all about engagement. You're not going to stick around for 3 hours or 2 hours or 90 or even 90 minutes watching a movie unless the beginning is something you can get behind. You know what? You got my attention. Proceed. The beginning of a story is all about engagement. wrapping your audience in, grabbing their attention. But if you give them nothing but the beginning of the movie, after a while, it's kind of like, you know what? I'm kind of tired of the hero of the story winning all the time. I am getting kind of tired of that. That gets old for me really fast. So the next piece of a story is all about conflict. It's the tables are turned. What you thought was true might not be true, might be limited in some way. There's something that's keeping you from seeing what you got used to seeing, right? And then the end of a story is all about resolving that tension. So you engage, you tense, you resolve, right? And so every great movie you've seen does those three things. They created a world for you, and they ruined it for you in the middle, and they make up for it at the end. That's basically every great movie has those three things, right? And in fact, every great movie does that. But as I kind of alluded to before, every great scene does that. Here's something that might blow your mind. All right, so go back to the dialogue from that 1 minute that I showed you, right? And if you look at it, you drill down into it, and but therefore, the engagement, conflict, resolution is in that 1 minute. The beginning of that 1 minute clip you saw, Margaret Carter was an amazing person, and so amazing. I didn't tell anybody that I was related to her. But she's a woman trying to become really good at something that a bunch of other people who weren't women didn't want her to succeed in. So how'd she make that happen? And then the end of that is all about the ways in which she was able to reconcile working in a world that she found was working against her. So it's a sell in your body. Every great moment, forget every great film, every great moment in a film likely has a story in it, right? And you can see it just in that 1 minute of film. So that's the template. Those are the active ingredients of story: and, but, therefore, right? And the trick is, well, how do you ingrain those things? By the way, this strategy for telling a story is kind of like the strategy we discussed earlier with the writing productivity, in that they're difficult to take in. They're going to take some time for them to digest. But once you get there, storytelling becomes like blinking, just the way that productivity is, right? Like my emails have stories in them now. It took years for that to happen, but it's basically something that pervades all things. The way I write papers, the way I write grants, the way I teach, the way I do everything, has story embedded in it. It does take time, but it does transform the way you carry out your work. So I'm going to give you a few strategies to help make the other strategies digest. And the way you think about it is taking those active ingredients and then breaking them down into places where story happens. Story happens down to the paragraph, the sentence, down to the word, right? Everything has story in it. And so, the right place to start with learning how to tell stories is to go back and ask yourself, what's the last great story I heard? What's the last great story I consumed? And instead of focusing on the content, focusing on the structure of that story, right? So I wouldn't use this for something that you haven't seen before, because you're already going to be engrossed. You're going to do all the things that stories ask you to do. You're going to be taken in by the content. I would go back to the last really good one that you consumed, and then ask yourself, what's the one word, what's the one phrase at the core of this story? And usually that amounts to, a concept that makes a thing that's really hard to interpret make sense. All right. So Randy Olson uses a sentence. So he says, nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. Lots of species, you got a chimpanzee over here, a human over here, you got a praying mantis over here, and a cockroach over there. there's too much going on here. How do you make sense of all that? Well, this theory helps us understand how these different species came about, how they evolved over time, things like that. All right. So as you're sort of consuming that opening story, ask yourself, how can I explain this in as little bit of information as possible? I'm going to give you another example outside of the film industry, closer to the kind of stuff you might read on a campus, right? And so I'm going to tell you a little story first. So my laboratory focuses a lot on how to put numbers on people's mental states, right? And one of the big mental states we focus on a lot is anxiety, and in particular, that kind of anxiety you feel when you're encountering an unfamiliar person or unfamiliar situation. You don't really know quite well how things are going to go about, but you feel a lot of distress, and sometimes it gets to the point where you don't even want to, make friends and influence people or give a speech or anything like that. You don't want to do any of those things, right? So adolescents experience this stuff a lot. The incidence of social anxiety spikes considerably when you're an adolescent. And so when we get adolescents to come in, because they're oftentimes not old enough to consent to services, to receiving mental health services, their parents, usually bring their concerns to our attention. And so when we want to get a sense of how they're thinking, feeling, and behaving as it relates to social anxiety, we'll ask the adolescent, how they're thinking, feeling, behaving. And we're going to ask their parents as well, because both of them are going to be involved in the care that the adolescent might or might not ultimately receive. We often just get very different answers from both of those people, from parents and adolescents, even when we're asking the same questions, right? That makes it really hard to make decisions, not just because two different people are providing us different answers, but because the adolescent is experiencing a set of concerns that oftentimes translates to them not wanting to look bad in front of other people, right? They don't like being evaluated negatively. So it becomes very easy for me to think, if they're different, then that means that maybe the adolescent isn't telling me the truth, right? Now, we have reason to believe that maybe that might not be true. What if we can come up with a plausible alternative for why those differences in reports happen? What if the adolescent is saying something different than their parent, not because they're downplaying what they're experiencing, but because they're thinking about other stuff besides how they behave at home? They're kind of the very kind of place the parents are used to seeing them in. Right, how do we make sense about that? So, take a minute to take a look at this abstract. It's from a recent paper from our group, and I'll give you about a minute to read through this. Not a lot to read. And then on the other side, I'm gonna talk about how we applied the word tool to it. So with this abstract, all we're basically saying is the parents and adolescents are seeing things differently. It makes decision making uncertain. It'd be great if we had a referee. It'd be great if we had another person who saw the adolescent behave in a completely different place than what the parents see, where the parent sees them. And then if we can compare and contrast them, then we can make a little more sense of it. So for us, the sentence was nothing in low correspondence in reports makes sense except in the light of peer reports. By having that extra person who sees the adolescent in a place the parent doesn't see, we were able to sort of tell whether or not the differences in what parents and adolescents say is less a reflection of the adolescent, for lack of a better term, BSing us, and more of the fact that what they're giving us is a bit of what's going on at home and a bit of what's going on at school, or a bit of what's going on with interactions with other individuals that parents don't often see. But the point of it is that the word tool allows you to develop essentially a set of talking points that allow you to communicate the main finding of the main bit of information you want to convey with as little information as possible. But it doesn't end there. And what I'd like to do before we move to the next tool is make a suggestion to you. I shudder to mention this, but I'm assigning you some homework. The good news is that I can't grade you, because this is probably the last time I'll see many of you. only please feel free to contact me if you have any questions about the work. But I've always found that if I get somebody curious enough to do something or willing to do something, homework is a great place to sort of increase the likelihood that stuff happens outside of the context of what we're sharing right now. So what I like you to do is think back to something that you've done recently, a story you've consumed, or some other kind of experience you've had. Could be a course you took, could be a series you saw, and try to use the sentence tool to make sense of it. So there's a course at our university called Helping Skills. It's taught by a really well-known counseling psychologist who wrote a textbook all about getting people, sometimes with very little training, with skills on how to communicate with somebody else who's going through some struggles. And a huge chunk of those skills are wrapped around a concept called the therapeutic relationship, trying to build a bond between these two individuals who might not have known each other before building this relationship together, but nonetheless, that context facilitates being able to hone skills to help others, and to display or express those skills when needed the most. So try to go back to something you've consumed recently, and try to break it down into those spaces. So word stage. That's the first stage of this. And now I'm going to show you a step that might look a bit more familiar to you than the word stage. And it's a sentence. And why might this be more familiar to you? Well, it's because this tool looks a lot like what people have called an elevator pitch. You're going up an elevator with somebody, you got 30 seconds to convey an idea. Maybe at the end of this, you got a deal. You just shake your hand, that kind of thing. What's in an elevator pitch? Because some of these things are ridiculous. If you Google an elevator pitch, you'll see like the 30 things you got to do to fit for your elevator pitch. The top 10 elevator pitch strategies. Garbage. Elevator pitch is 3 things. And, but, therefore. That's what a great elevator pitch has. A great elevator pitch has those 3 things. Set expectations. Violate those expectations. Resolve them. That's all you're doing with a great elevator pitch, right? And it's designed to sort of turn on an audience member's brain and get them to consume the information in a way that they're used to consuming, right? So it's about grabbing the audience's attention, and you can do that with as little as 1 sentence. So if you go back to that abstract you just saw, I'm going to expand out that sentence and do a little more. So the main pattern is fact, but then this thing, and therefore this thing, right? And so if you break it up a little bit, these social anxiety assessments rely on these informants, this informant and that informant, but when they disagree, it's really hard to make sense of them. And therefore, we did a study where we brought a third person in, and boom, that helped us understand what the differences were between the original informants. It's all about just expand out, like I mentioned before, stories that sell in your body. Expand it out just a little bit bigger to cover a little more ground than it did before. By the way, I'll have these slides PDF, and then I'll send it to Eric and Viraj to send out to the rest of you. So Here's another exercise I'm going to give you. So this homework that I'm giving you is a three-part. This is the second part of the three-part homework series, right? So what I encourage you to do is take a crack at putting together this sentence on your own, and it could be something that you're working on right now. It could be like an application you're putting together for an internship, or a job application, or a grad school application. It could be a description of a set of experiences you had with an organization that you're a part of before. And the trick is, you don't want to just give people facts. You don't want to make your story too complex. You want to stay right in the middle there, where you're starting off with some information, you're engaging your audience, you're giving them a conflict, you're resolving it. Right? That's the big thing with the sentence tool. You should do that. You should be able to do that with one sentence. And then once you get those two ingredients, those tools to help you ingest story, then things get a little more interesting, because you can build up, like I mentioned before, you can build up story to an entire piece, or take it all the way down to like a paragraph or a sentence. Right? This was the hardest one. The first two can seem kind of intuitive, but the paragraph tool is a little more difficult because it involves connecting little bitty stories in between each other. Right? So the trick isn't necessarily to think about, I have to master this now. And it's more about keeping it on your radar for going forward once you've already built up past words and sentences. Now, if you go back to that, like in a world, that trailer guy, that guy's explaining a movie, and a trailer is designed to sort of give you an idea of the entire movie without giving too much away, right? But if you were to be pulled in by the trailer or a movie, and then you're sitting down and watching the movie, this is the way most movies flow out. They start off, and what it is basically and but therefore broken out into much bigger, basically stretched out into a series of things, right? So engagement. You see this hero in the movie, but they have some things about them that are eventually going to get them into trouble. Then trouble ensues, and then some regrouping happens, and then and the climax of the film, and then everybody goes home, and everybody's happy for the most part. Sometimes less people make it out happy. But suffice to say, the paragraph tool is designed to sort of illustrate for you that a chunk of story involves understanding its minutia and how it works in any one place, but then kind of stretch it out over time, like basically getting it out. So over time you're able to sort of connect all these little stories into one big one. And the abstract that I keep on going back to has that as well. So any abstract or any summary you're giving of a piece of work, any larger piece of work, has a series of steps in there as well. It's not only and but therefore. In some respects, you can sort of think of it as like and but therefore part 1, and but therefore part 2, and but therefore part 3. A lot of this goes in threes. What's weird is that, and this is going to blow your mind a little bit, unless you sort of saw me going this way a mile away, but every great movie is one story. And if you were to take that movie and arrange it so that you're telling one movie and then there's a sequel and there's one at the end, every great trilogy of movies has this exact same structure. There's a reason why you learned that Darth Vader was Luke's father in the middle in Empire, right? And you don't hear about Princess Leia being Luke's sister until the end, right? So there's a reason why you hear all those things, because that first one was a conflict, and the third one was a resolution, was a component of the resolution. So you even see the story in that context. But suffice to say, in any one piece, especially that abstract, it's kind of like you give people at the beginning of the abstract a broad sense of where the area is, a broad context, and then a narrowing context. Like you have like this is about social anxiety, and then not soon after that, you find out what specifically about social anxiety you're focusing on. And then you get to, look, we've learned a lot about this stuff, but there's a huge gap in the literature that they're trying to make sense of. And therefore, that's what we're going to do with this thing, right? And that process essentially repeats itself a few more times before story ends. But the trick here is to see how that gestalt has stories embedded in them, but the stories repeated in that overall picture as well. And as you master all these different tools that are designed to help with learning story, the trick is to continue practicing them. You can practice them in all kinds of different ways. I gave you a couple of examples, but you can do it with your own work that you're working on, that you're putting together as well. And a lot of it is really getting practice consuming stories that you've already seen, and then break down their structure. What makes them compelling? What makes them useful? And because in many of the contexts in which we're writing, unfortunately, there aren't a lot of great examples. Like if you're a researcher, there aren't a lot of great examples of great storytelling in articles that you read or books that you read. Oftentimes they're pretty stale, they're pretty dry. But the good news is that storytelling, the principles of storytelling generalize through a lot of different things. So there's nothing keeping you from using the examples you see in other places where stories happen, like documentaries, podcasts, books, movies. There's nothing keeping you from looking at those and then seeing how they might map on to what you do. We're gonna, before I want to get your questions. I want to take your questions and get a sense of your reactions to all this stuff. But we're going to end off with like a detective activity. So when in the email you got with the Zoom link, you got a PDF of a series of abstracts that there's only 3 of them. And what I love about this activity is that I guarantee you that maybe like on one hand I can count the number of people who know the topic area with the abstracts that the abstracts are focused on, and you'll still be able to use it to pick out the clues of which one's telling a good story and which one is not. So the 3 abstracts that we're reading that we'll look over just now are going to display one of these 3 characteristics. They're either going to do the Goldilocks thing. They're going to be ABT. They're going to give you nothing but facts, or they're going to give you a really confusing, like complex, too convoluted a story, right? So I'm going to give you about a minute to read the first abstract, and then afterwards we can. I want to get a sense from one of you about what you think, which one you think that is. All right, what's abstract 1? Who wants? Is there a brave soul out there who can tell us what abstract 1 is? You can say it if you want.
Despite, however, yet.
Yep. Yeah. Too complex. Isn't that weird? Like, isn't it weird that like who here had a show of hands? Who here had a background in what we just read? no background, right? It's so empowering. It's like you can go to any piece of information. You're kind of like, I don't know what this person's trying to say, but I know it. I don't know whatever they're trying to say. It's too complex. It's way over my head. No bueno. All right. Let's go to the next one. I'll give you a minute to look over that one too. What about abstract 2? What's that one looking like?
I would guess the ABT.
Yeah, it's ABT. Yeah, again, kind of interesting that, like, it's and as a brief background, the author of these are actually all abstracts from Randy Olson's book Houston, We Have a Narrative, and he was a marine biologist by training before he became a documentary filmmaker. So surprise, they're all like stuff in biology. And what about abstract 3? Let's take a minute to look at that one. What do people think? Abstract 3.
Just a bunch of examples. It's and just listing.
Yeah. It's all and no structure, just straight facts. Basically, the kind of abstract we're used to seeing. A lot of the summaries we're used to seeing in a lot of different contexts. One last piece of homework that might help with taking in these strategies is to go back to the beginning. Think about that story that you thought about with the word homework, and then once you figure out how to use word to explain it, then take the other tools that we've learned to break it down. Break in. So what you should be able to do is use ABT to break down the beginning of the story, to break the middle of the story, and to break down the end of the story. You might say to yourself, well, that doesn't make, really? There's a bunch of little mini stories in there, and that's the piece that is really going to blow you away once you start getting a sense of what storytelling can offer. Because I told you before that 1 minute clip that had a story in there, right? There's one story in there. What will really blow your mind is that there's another story in that 1 minute, right? So she had a photograph of there, and Peggy standing next to JFK. this and this, but that was a lot to live up to, which is why I never told anyone. It's amazing. There's many stories in that 1 minute, which lends credence to the idea that part of the reason why that 1 minute is so compelling is that woven into that space are all these different places where storytelling happens. So there's a bunch of different resources out there for how to tell good stories, and that entire area of work, science communications, SciComm. That this is one of the tools people often use in that discipline to communicate information about science. What I would encourage you to do is buy Randy Olson's book. It's a really solid piece of work, very compelling. If you're an early career researcher, what I did this year was I put out a book myself, but what it really is an extension of Randy Olson's work to somebody, to be applicable to somebody who's new to the research process and figuring out how to tell a story by themselves when they don't have a lot of control over what they study and how they study it. One last thing, if you find any of this stuff helpful, every year we hold a conference called the Future Directions Forum. We hold it in DC. Fingers crossed that we remain at least in phase 2 of the social distancing guidelines in DC, because if so, we get to hold it live next year. But if not, we'll hold it again on Zoom, regardless of whether or not we hold it in person or virtually. We'll broadcast all the content via Zoom for free or on site, and then just keep an eye out to our website for more information about what we're planning on doing and the different elements of programming. And we recently posted all the workshops we did this last year in June on our YouTube channel. So if you go over to that channel, or just type in Future Directions Forum on on YouTube, you'll find our channel. There's a bunch of different stuff in there related to all elements of academic work. Thank you so much for your time. I've been looking forward to hearing your questions or comments and other things you have on your mind. And I think we saved enough time to talk about stuff.
Outstanding. And look at that virtual clapping. So thank you a ton for doing the talk. Really exciting to have you as the inaugural speaker of the first year of the HGAPS speaker series. That was really fantastic. We have a second talk already lined up. So November 4th, 6 p.m. is Dr. Anna Van Meter, who is doing a talk on beyond Snapchat and Instagram, using technology to actually improve outcomes for young people with mental health concerns. Mm-hmm. So trying to figure out a way of using that as a force for good rather than. And so I want to thank Dr. De Los Reyes. I want to thank Taylor Steele for writing the grant, and thank Student Senate of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill for funding the speaker series. Want to thank everyone for coming tonight. This is our first one, and we knew that Dr. De Los Reyes was going to do an outstanding job. But if you have suggestions, things that will make this even more helpful or fun or interactive, please drop them in the chat. We have copied comments and questions and things over, and we're saving them. We're recording the talk. We're going to convert the talk into a YouTube format. We're going to link that to the hgaps.org website. Dr. De Los Reyes said that did he say that he was going to give us the slides?
Yeah,
no,
of course.
He was going to give you the slides. So the slides are coming to all of you. Also, we'll link them up on HGAPS. So we're going to get you the slides. We're going to have a recording of the talk. Other suggestions that would be helpful, please keep them coming. And Taylor, Caroline, do you want to moderate the questions, or how do we want to do this?
Yeah, I can moderate questions. Also, if you guys see in the chat, I dropped the infographic for the talk for Dr. Van Meter. So save that, put it in your calendars, also register for that. But yeah, so if you guys want to just put them in the chat box or unmute yourselves, feel free. We do have a lot of time for questions.
So when when you were talking about the Boyce doing the research with people and assigning them to the 3 different conditions,
Yeah.
the people that were in the spontaneous condition, did they feel happier? Did they enjoy the writing more? Were they less stressed?
You know, it's interesting. I don't know if Boyce measured those things. I have to look back and see if he did. But I don't know if he did. Do you remember if he did or not?
I don't know if he did in that study, but another shocking finding in, I don't know how many projects he did, but that group, their Beck depression scores went up over time. So they're like, the muses are not talking to me. The calendar keeps going by.
That's horrible.
And I'm waiting. Help. It turns out that desperation doesn't make you feel more creative.
Man, it's so spontaneous writing is a harmful treatment. Wow. Yeah, that's mind blowing. It doesn't. It's not surprising, but such an interesting element that, like, not only are you not as inspired as somebody who's just building it into their daily life, but it actually might stress you out. Yeah.
So,
someone else, please.
All right. So I had a question. Like this whole time, I've been thinking about this in the framework of academic writing. So your intro, methods, results, discussion, and I feel like I have a pretty good idea of how to do that in the intro without, giving away too much of what I'm going to discuss. But I get a little bit more confused in the methods and result of how to do ABT, because I know that a lot of times you're like, okay, some of this that I end up writing something in results that should go in discussion, or vice versa. So I know that's kind of a loaded question, but do you have any advice particularly for the methods and results section on how to do ABT?
Yeah, so with the method section, it's usually a little less important to use these kinds of tools, in part because the main focus of the method section is less to grab the reader and more to essentially create an instruction manual for that for your study in case somebody else wants to do it again. And so but where I would say it's a little easier or useful to use it, like in a reference section, is if you're trying to organize the findings among themselves. Like, for instance, let's say you have a set of findings you wanted to report.
Yeah.
But that reviewers might take issue.
Yes. Yeah.
With how you interpret the findings. Yeah. So what you could do is report the stuff that you think is most compelling. Explain that these findings are important to contextualize because they could be explained by something else, and therefore these last sets of analyses are designed to test whether or not there's an alternative interpretation to what you might want to say. So method section a little less important for using story because it's not designed to do that. But the results is where you definitely want to engage an audience, because you want them to be able to ingest this enough so that you can talk about, so you can interpret them in the discussion. The discussion is kind of like the reverse of what the introduction is. People always talk about the funnel.
Yeah.
That, like, there's like a funnel thing. The funnel's not a terribly good analogy because it doesn't really unpack what makes a funnel a funnel.
Mm-hmm.
The discussion piece is infuse the story insofar as it retells the main findings, right? And then afterwards, it's kind of like, this is what I found. There are a bunch of limitations to the study.
Yeah.
And I'm going to lay out a few of the things that raise questions with regards to how you can interpret them, what implications they might have. And then afterwards, you're laying out what people might do next.
Yeah.
Particularly if you want to correct those limitations. Right. So it's main findings, limitations, directions.
Mm-hmm.
Directions and implications. And if you think about that, you can break the discussion down in much the same ways you can in introduction. But just in some respects in a reverse sort of like funnel plot format.
That's really helpful. Yeah. I think with the methods like that I'm doing right now is I've been looking at what's so important, what I'm trying to tell, like my findings, and then from that trying to figure out what is important or what details are important for me to say in the methods, and what are just,
Mm-hmm.
Things that maybe people might have questions if they later, it's not like critical for me to include them. Because
yeah. So a couple of things with that, with the method section, as long as you keep yourself in the mindset of this is designed for me to etch in stone what I know somebody will need to know if they want to repeat what I just did. Right. So that's the main thing. And also it's a place where you're defending decisions you made.
Yes. Yeah.
So like, you measured something this way, and this is the empirical support for why you did it this way. You ran this analysis for this reason, and this is how you laid it out. So it's where you defend decisions, but also it's where you give people a record of what you did. And sometimes there's so much you can put in. And the good news is that a lot of these journals have an option for electronic supplementary material, and it's where you can pack away things that people might need, but then it keeps it away from the word count, and it's just posted into the other paper afterwards. Does that help out?
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Wilson, you had a question?
Yeah, I was gonna go back to, you were talking about the SAPI method. It seemed like that's the way you were describing it. There were a lot of other areas where you could pick up skills that are applicable to it as well. I don't know if you could speak to that. Like, say, if I wanted to learn a new coding language or a language, there are a lot of ways you could apply that elsewhere.
Yeah. I mean, so with coding is a nice place to think about breaking down the strategy, because when you're thinking about like the process through which you're learning a new computer-based language, I mean, that can also get broken down. It could get broken down to like, okay, during my writing time, I'm gonna read chapter 1 of the manual. I'm gonna read this section of that textbook. The important thing is that for many of us, whenever we're trying to cross something on our list, our tendency, particularly if we're really interested in it, is to find a place where we can dump all our work in that one spot and then come out on the other side. And for some of us that works okay, but for many of us it's not sustainable. Because there's only so many different parts of our lives where we can have a means by which we carve out something over here, and then nothing else gets affected. And so I tend to like this approach, with its caveats, of course, because there are some certain tasks that we have where we don't have the luxury of breaking them out into chunks. Like there's that deadline for that program that I have to turn in, and that's like 2 weeks away. They just told me it needs to get done. So yeah, SAPI doesn't work that well for something like that, because you are going to need to dump a ton of time on this thing. But to the degree that you can space it out over time, I think it winds up being a pretty efficient means of doing it. Here's one thing where I found it really helpful. Like, let's say you get feedback from somebody about your program, right? Mm-hmm. And it's broken down into itemized lists. like this person looked over my code and had these comments, had 5. I love writing time for stuff like that, because writing time is this. I sit down and it's like, you know what? This is writing time number 1. It's going to be, comment 5. And then my next writing time is comment 4 and 2. And whichever one I think I want to accomplish during that one time. And it's a great way of knocking things off your list when somebody gives you a to-do list of something to take care of. Mm-hmm. But maybe for that first step, if you're not giving too much lead time, right. it may be necessary
if it's not something
to cover.
Yeah. If it has like a more upcoming deadline, it's more objective oriented than learning or improving.
One thing I'll tell you though, even it doesn't mean that something with deadlines you can't use it. So like my version of your coding situation is I send a paper to a journal, and it comes back, and I get like 30 comments. Like 30 comments. Come on, man. Damn. You know what that is though? Writing time, my writing time then becomes like reviewer 2, comment 10. Reviewer 3, comment 2, and I just cross them off until and usually if it's 30 comments where I'm like 30 comments, I'm usually given about 60 days to do it. All right. So if I use this approach and every one of my writing time days, and if I make a deal to myself, I'm gonna tackle 1 comment per day. I'm done in a month, and then I got another month to edit the thing, let my colleagues see it, my co-authors and stuff. So even things with deadlines, so long as it's a long enough deadline, this strategy works great.
Nice. Okay. Thank you. This is great.
Any other questions?
Amy Dikasinik was asking about advice about getting started, and do you focus on words or do you focus on time? Does it make a difference?
Good question. So I think of them together. So let's say your writing time is like 25 minutes. What I would start doing is trying to figure out like how much can I get done within that set period of time, where it's something I can reasonably do over and over again. For some of us, 25 minutes can net us 300 words. For some of us, it can net us 400 words. It depends on what we're working on. But I would try to figure out what's feasible to do within that period of time. And then for some writing times, you might be able to do like 20 minutes here, but 40 minutes over there. And so maybe the word counts are a little bit different. I was working on a paper recently where, the timeline was pretty tight, and I told myself, I'm going to do 500 words in a day. Right. And I spaced it out where I was like, if I did that, I'd be done in X period of time. And that's what I told myself. And it was kind of like, that's what I was thinking about when I got the comment earlier about flow. That was a writing project where I could get away with absolving myself of flow. I was able to tell myself, I hit my 500 for today. I don't want to overdo it. Let me just stop here, and then I'll sleep on it. But then when I woke up the next day, it was a little easier it was actually pretty simple to get back to it and hit on those next 500. In part because I didn't gas myself out the day before. But it really depends on the project. For some things that you're really passionate about, where you're 45 minutes in and you're like, I don't want to give this up. Don't just keep on going, but just also keep it in the back of your mind that you don't want to get to a place where you revert back to old habits, or all you did was write when you got flow.
We're right at time. I want to thank Dr. De Los Reyes again for a wonderful talk. I want to take a step back and just how many of you have seen one of the reels for Carolina basketball where they're talking about the team and all the numbers? 7 national championships, and this was a fantastic talk. that summarized 3 books in one evening. And this is someone offering tips about writing, and he's published 100 papers and millions of dollars of grants, and he's the editor at a major journal. So he has held, I was trying to do the math, thousands of papers that people have worked on, a ton, and he's looking at it and he's like, this one needs a little bit more B. This one needs the whole ABT. So this was a great talk from someone. This was Roy Williams doing a talk about how to shoot some hoop, how to fit that into your life. And what I loved about it too is, for someone of his accomplishment and someone of his stature, he very real, very down to earth, and talking about had a kid, we're all busy. The forecast is continued busy, and these are ways of finding smaller chunks of time than you thought to accomplish remarkable things. Fist bump. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. That was really kind. It didn't occur to me that it was 3 books in 90 minutes. Yeah, that's kind of crazy. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, HGAPS, and I see a lot of HGAPers in the audience. You guys built this. You guys made this possible. This was a lot of fun, and it's recorded. Wilson, I'm counting on you to help.
So, great work, everybody.
We got it. That was a great one take.
So
great work, everybody.
Yeah, along those lines, Emma put in the chat the YouTube channel, and so this will be provided afterwards. So if you want to go back and reference, I know I need to go through and make some notes. That was great information, but make sure you check that out, and also our other things on there as well.
All right, so everyone who came to this, everyone who RSVP'd that they were coming, we're sending the slides, and we'll send the link to the YouTube. Everyone who said, yes, I want more HGAPS, we will send you the information about the next talk, November 4th, 6 o'clock. Social media, is there any way that it might be helpful for our mental health? And keep the suggestions coming. Thank you guys all.